This morning, we will be exploring a story found in the book of Luke. Let's dive right into chapter 7 and we'll begin reading from verse 36. One of the Pharisees invited Jesus to have dinner with him, and he went into the home of the Pharisee and took his place at the table. So one day, a Pharisee invites Jesus to have a meal at his home. And if you know a bit about most of the recorded interactions between Jesus and the Pharisees and other religious leaders of his day, you know that this seems like an unusually warm and welcoming act on part of the Pharisee. As a group, they are more often trying to avoid, arrest, entrap, or attack Jesus. But in this story, Jesus is invited over for dinner. And this particular Pharisee's name is Simon. What an open minded man Simon seems to be. Let's read what happens during this particular dinner party. Verse 37. A woman in that town who lived a sinful life learned that Jesus was eating at the Pharisee's house. So she came there with an alabaster jar of very expensive perfume. She stood behind him at his feet weeping until her tears began to wet his feet. Then she wiped them with her own hair, kissed them, and poured perfume on them. A woman comes into the house during this dinner party. She stands by Jesus' feet. This doesn't mean she went under the table because in those days, meal times looked a bit different than it does for us today. Usually, particularly the honored guests of the house, would recline or lie down on a sort of chaise lounge or couch, if you will, around the table. And they would eat in this reclined, relaxed position. And so this woman is able to come and stand at the foot of the couch Jesus is lying on. And as she does, she begins crying, wiping his feet, and then pours perfume on them. Now, what this woman does is no ordinary act. First of all, the text says she is crying, and clearly a lot, enough to make someone's feet wet. Secondly, when she does make them wet, she dries Jesus' feet with her hair. In those days, a woman's hair was considered one of her crowning glories. It was a part of her beauty as a woman, a matter of pride was to take care of her hair. And now she's using it as, in essence, a foot towel. She's using her object of pride in such a humble way. Keep in mind, Jesus walked around a lot during the day, and he doesn't walk around inside clean shopping malls and down tarmac pavements. He walks down dusty Judean roads and through fields and up grassy hills. His feet would be dusty and dirty from the road, and now this woman is wiping all that off with her hair. And lastly, she pours perfume on his feet, or ointment, and this is not just any old perfume. First of all, it is kept in an alabaster jar or container, which was a really expensive thing to buy at the time. Secondly, the oil itself, it is estimated, would have cost at least 300 denarii. That is a full year's salary for an average person in the Roman era. And the text says the ointment too was expensive. Well, this is turning out to be quite an interesting dinner party. How does the host Simon react to all of this? Verse 39. When the Pharisee who had invited him saw what was going on, he said to himself, if this man were really a prophet, he would have known who is touching him and what sort of woman she is, that she is a sinner. Jesus answered him, Simon, I have something to tell you. Tell me, teacher, he said. Two people owed money to a certain moneylender. One owed him 500 denarii and the other 50. Neither of them had the money to pay him back, so he forgave the debts of both. Now which of them will love him more? Simon replied, I suppose the one who had the bigger debt forgiven. You have judged correctly, Jesus said. So, this woman is perfuming Jesus' feet, and the Pharisee thinks to himself, if this man, this guest at my table, were really a prophet, he would have known who is touching him and what sort of woman she is, that she's a sinner. And then verse 40 says, Jesus answered him. Now, I don't know about you, but if I'm thinking in my head, in the privacy of my own mind about something, and then someone sitting next to me answers a question I'm thinking about, I'm going to be pretty shocked. How do you know what I'm thinking? It would be a bit like if me and my husband were out shopping for food, and he stops by the apples and thinks to himself, should I make an apple pie this week? And then I promptly walk up to him and say, yes, I think you should make an apple pie. The text says Simon was thinking these things and Jesus answers him. Simon, I have something to tell you, says Jesus. Simon replies, tell me, and Jesus tells him this story which we've heard of two people who owe a money debt, one a smaller debt and the other a large one. And when they're both forgiven by the person lending the money, Jesus asks, who will love the money lender more? And Simon replies, the one who owed him the most and had the biggest debt forgiven. You have judged correctly, Jesus said. Now let's address something which is obvious yet easy to miss in this story. First of all, this is a private residence. It is Simon's personal home. It's not a train station, it's not a public building, and a random woman from the nearby town has just walked right in. She doesn't just slip in quietly and sneak into the bathroom to steal some hand soap. She walks right up to the dinner table and stands in full sight of everyone there, including the host. How is this woman able to come into Simon's house like this? It's not like there would be no one there to see her. The house would have had servants, it has dinner guests, and yet she has entered uninterrupted and no one has stopped her. Secondly, when Simon the host sees the woman and what she is doing to Jesus' feet, he thinks to himself, if this man were really a prophet, he would have known who is touching him and what sort of woman she is, that she is a sinner. Now, the cultural implication and language here is that this woman is sexually immoral. That is how it's often put. A woman was often, first and foremost, labeled as a sinner, a worst sort of sinner, due to her sexual misconduct. Whether that be being a prostitute, simply sleeping around, or being adulterous in her marriage. The fact that she can afford such an expensive container and perfume suggests that she does have a form of income, so most likely she is a prostitute. And as the text says in the introduction, and also based on Simon's thoughts about her, she is clearly well known in the town. She is known specifically for being so called a sinner. But hold on. How has this woman, who isn't only a stranger, but is also well known by people in that town for being a certain kind of sinner, how has she walked right into a Pharisee's home? She hasn't been challenged a single time and walks right in the door as though she's at home there. He said to himself, if this man were really a prophet, he would know what sort of woman she is. Simon, how do you know what sort of woman she is? And if you know what sort of woman she is, how has she been able to enter your home? And why is she treated with such familiarity? In a great twist, it seems that Simon the Pharisee is indeed very familiar with this woman, to the point where none of his household, his servants, or even himself is described as being particularly surprised at seeing her there. He doesn't yell at her or tell her to leave. She even has enough time to stand there and weep onto Jesus' feet. Now, you might say, oh, well, Simon was just being a gracious host even to a stranger. But in those days, having a ceremonially unclean woman under your roof in your house meant that you were now made unclean too. That everybody in that household became unclean. That is why a Pharisee would never enter the house of say, a tax collector or a prostitute or touch a leper, because this would make him unclean according to the Levitical laws given in the days of Moses. And then he would have to go to the temple, go through a whole cleansing process, and have to wait a certain amount of days before he would again be considered clean. And if you are ceremonially unclean, you can't enter the temple, you can't enter the synagogue, you can't carry out the functions of a religious leader until you are made clean again, until you're pronounced so by a priest. So it's a very big deal. And religious leaders of the day would avoid things and people which would make them unclean. Now, by this woman coming into his house, the whole household, as we've said, would be considered unclean. So, Simon, all his guests, everyone, and consider the reputation damage too. Wouldn't Simon be concerned at his position being compromised by this woman being in his home? Today, if a prostitute strolls around the pastor's house, wouldn't it set tongues wagging among the church members who are around for Sabbath potluck? So it's clear that this isn't just happening in a vacuum. There's a background here, there's a context, a familiarity between Simon and this sinful woman, as he calls her. Now, why would a Pharisee be familiar with a woman who is likely a prostitute? And then Simon has the audacity to think privately to himself, Jesus has no idea who's touching him. She is a sinner, reflecting the idea in those days, and I'd even argue today, that somehow it is often women who are labeled as whores and immoral and dirty in sexual exchanges outside marriage, almost as though people forget it takes two to tango. Even in our society, women are often labeled as loose or at fault when sleeping around, while men are more likely to get a wink or a pat on the back like they've achieved some great or passable thing. But Jesus' response to this situation, his story about the two debtors, is saying someone who knows they have sin, a lot of debt, and are then forgiven, they will respond with the most love. Simon has silently judged this woman, seeming to conveniently forget his own sin, but Jesus publicly honors her. Verse 44. Then he, that is Jesus, turned towards the woman and said to Simon, Do you see this woman? I came into your house. You did not give me any water for my feet, but she wet my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. You did not give me a kiss, but this woman from the time I have entered has not stopped kissing my feet. You did not put oil on my head, but she has poured perfume on my feet. Therefore, I tell you, her many sins have been forgiven, as her great love has shown. But whoever has been forgiven little loves little. Then Jesus said to her, Your sins are forgiven. At this point, those eating with him began saying among themselves, Who is this fellow that presumes to forgive sins? Jesus said to the woman, By trust you are saved. Go in peace. Now it was customary when inviting someone to your house, particularly an honored guest, to offer their feet to be cleaned. This was part of Jewish hospitality. Also, it was customary for people to greet each other with a kiss, a bit like the French do today, a kiss on each cheek in greeting. Jesus says to Simon, You've done none of these things since inviting me to your home, but this woman has. She's done far more than any gracious host would do. She's gone far beyond even the most honoring act. She took a real risk by coming so publicly to Jesus. Jesus could have easily shut her down or publicly shamed her or condemned her. But Jesus forgives her sins instead. He receives her gift, treats her with dignity and kindness, celebrates her publicly, and tells her to go in peace. Things really took a turn that day during dinner at Simon's house. It turned out to be quite a dramatic dinner party, in fact. Sometimes there seems to be something simultaneously disrupting and comforting about having Jesus around. For those who know they are not perfect and that know that they need help, they find this welcoming, kind God who doesn't shame or turn them away, but treats them with dignity and opens the door to new and better freedoms. And for those pretending they're not sinners and look down on others, this same kindness, this same welcoming love doesn't change, but it can feel uncomfortable and unwelcome. Whatever your life looks like, if others see you as dirty or a sinner, if you know yourself that your life isn't where it should be, perhaps you've been shamed, maybe for behavior others have taken part in, if you have been burdened by your past and your present, there is one who isn't going to turn you away. Not ever. There is one who defends you even in front of people considered or perhaps pretending to be sinless and righteous and better than you. Because the truth is, we all need forgiveness. We all need his forgiveness. We have all failed to be just and do good in this world. But Jesus isn't interested in people's pretending or our outward appearance of cleanliness, but he loves helping those who know they need his help. And he welcomes anyone who might approach him into a space of honesty and authenticity. And in that space, they are met with compassion, with lavish forgiveness, and given peace. And you can tell this by how he welcomed and treated the woman that day during dinner at Simon's house.